Okay, remember the last video when I said I wasn't super familiar with medieval fashion history? Well, Regency is the era I have studied. I'm not an expert, but I know a bit. So needless to say, when I found out that there was a new Jane Austen adaptation coming out, I was very excited. To make this video, I took 332 screenshots from the movie. Every time Emma is on screen and I noticed a new detail in her costuming. And then I broke down these screenshots and studied them, creating a full inventory of the elements that went into each costume. I planned to include the full breakdown in this video, but the full script ended up being over 12,000 words, so I had to break it up. This video will be focusing on the bigger picture, going over background info for the Regency era, evaluating her wardrobe as a whole, and discussing Emma's costuming as a representation of an upper-class Regency woman. But I will release a follow-up video that delves more deeply into the scene-by-scene analysis. First, for those of you less versed in the Regency era, a summary. The Regency era in fashion is ascribed to roughly 1795 through 1829. The last 5 years of the 18th century saw a rapid fashion revolution. The French Revolution took the 18th century love of artifice and structure and chucked it all right out the window. Young people of the day wanted to visually set themselves apart from the bougie aristocracy, which was currently being beheaded. The waistline started to rise and straighten. The chemise à la reine began to expand in prominence, evolving from a controversial celebrity fad into a staple base for new gown construction. The old styles struggled to adapt and blend with new fashions, sometimes with awkward results. By the end of the century, Regency fashion had stabilized into the neoclassical look, borrowing heavily from Greek art, which is just fantastic. Here they are, a bunch of young revolutionaries with their high ideals about philosophy and senates. And a sizable portion of the female population was like, "That's cool, but can I wear it?" Which honestly, I have never identified with a feeling so much in my life. There was a bit of fumbling about as women struggled to adapt their pattern drafting to the new styles. There were a lot of interesting and creative sewing methods devised, such as the bib front dress closures and wrapped stays. Early in the decade, skirts still had some fullness. They often had trains and usually fitted sleeves reaching almost to the elbow. The predominantly white dresses could be varied up with short bodices, turbans, an array of Grecian-inspired wraps, and many other types of accessories. At the height of the neoclassical phase, bodices reached an extreme shape, as low in the neck and high in the waist as possible, with the most perfectly squared necklines they could achieve. Towards the end of the 1810s, these extremes started to decline. You constantly see that in fashion history. A trend will grow and grow until it reaches ridiculous levels, then it snaps back to something more subtle, before starting down a completely new, ridiculous path. While still wide, necklines weren't quite so low, and they started to take on rounder shapes. The trains receded from the skirts, and the skirts lost volume to become slim-fitting, with only the essential amount of bulk centered at the back. Sleeves were made shorter, and puffed sleeves became more fashionable. Construction methods also became more streamlined, dresses either closing with buttons or drawstrings at the back. During the 18-teens, these trends continued, with the addition of new trends, which would become much more common later in the 20s. Drifting away from the ultra-simplicity of the neoclassical period, more decoration became favorable. Increasingly elaborate trimmings were used at the hems of the long skirts. White was still the staple color, but you did start to see more patterns coming back into play. The waistlines slowly lowered away from their extremes. The hems continued their rise to a practical ankle length, and fullness came back a bit at the hem. Short puffed sleeves became fashionable, and they were often layered atop long fitted sleeves. During the 1820s, the evolution of these trends became more distinct. The waistlines finally settled to just above the natural waist. The fullness continued to gather in the skirts, and more innovations were developed to inexpensively add to the decoration of the clothing. Puffed, padded designs were built into the skirts. More intricate designs were used to create texture in the puffed sleeves, which continued to grow in volume. The necklines, for the most part, remained wide, but they became much more conservative. While bodices in the earlier parts of the Regency were usually fitted with gathers, smooth, darted bodices became much more fashionable as the period wore on. The 20s are still considered part of the Regency, but they are another transitional time for fashion. And by the 30s, these trends had evolved to such an extreme that their simplistic origins were almost completely untraceable. However, Jane Austen published Emma in the year 1815, and judging by the costumes of the 2020 adaptation, this is most likely the year targeted for the setting of the film. By distilling what we know of Regency fashion, we can create a baseline for what an individual outfit might consist of. And it is important to understand the purpose behind each layer in a Regency ensemble if we are to properly appreciate the costuming in Emma. Each woman would start her outfit with a shift, usually in white linen. She would wear stockings held up by garters. Her shoes were usually either simple leather boots or flat slippers, laced across the foot and tied at the ankle. The 18th century stays had fallen to the wayside, but a new, lighter version had replaced them. They could be long or short, simple or more complex, dependent on the needs and design of the individual wearer. Next, at least one petticoat was necessary to achieve an appropriate level of opacity in the light sheer fabrics. Petticoats had been adapted to the high waistlines, and were now either held up by suspenders, or they were commonly sewn to an underbodice. The underbodice fulfilled its own function, in that it added to the dress's opacity and also softened the lines of the stays. Bodiced petticoats could have sleeves or remain sleeveless, and it was popular to make them from a bright color, so that the sheer overdresses could be inexpensively varied up. The next layer would be the dress. They were, as mentioned, very lightweight and often completely sheer. There is a great amount of distinction in the type of dress and accessory combination in regards to the time of day and activity for which it was worn. Most commonly, however, a morning dress would have long sleeves and the low necklines would be filled in with a fichu or chemisette. A lady might carry a shawl to ward off the chill, or she might wear a cap to preserve her hairstyle. If she decided to go for a walk or promenade through town, she added some kind of jacket, usually a short spencer or skirted police coat, from which the ruffles of the chemisette could peep over her collar, adding to the look. In addition to the jacket, she would also don a bonnet, gloves, and small reticule, which had replaced the large pockets of previous eras, as they no longer fit discreetly beneath the slim, sheer skirts. And for the evening, when friends and families came together for dinner and entertainment, the ladies wanted to look their best. This might involve a completely new dress, with short sleeves and finer materials, or it might be as simple as removing the chemisette and adding some jewelry. Evening dress rules were mostly extended to party attire and dances, as far as what was and was not appropriate. However, ladies always wore gloves when in public, though this was not necessary in their own homes. So how well did the costumer stick to conventional Regency attire when developing Emma's silhouette? Pretty well, actually, with a few important but purposeful departures. Twice, we see Emma in a shift, with a squared neckline and puffed sleeves. We see her stockings, and she has at least two different types of stockings that she wears at different times of the year and for different occasions. One is a thicker, ribbed stocking with ribbon garters tied above the knee. The other is a finer knit stocking. She is wearing stays, which we can tell by her overall silhouette, and a few times it actually peeps above the back neckline of the dress. But that's it. They never show us Emma's stays in their entirety, though we do get a nice shot of Harriet's. Over the stays, she wears a petticoat. There never seems to be more than one layer of petticoat showing, so we're probably just dealing with one each time. The petticoats are definitely bodiced, because usually you can see the neckline clearly through her dress, and you can never see any details about the stays through the dress, so an underbodice must be diffusing it. Over the petticoat, she will wear a gown, along with an assortment of chemisettes, bodices, jackets, jewelry, and other accessories. The biggest departure from history is one that I can only speculate on. I do not think that the puff sleeve shift we see a few times was actually worn underneath her costumes. Her sleeves are usually sheer, and you can often see her undersleeves through them. They seem to be of a completely uniform style, ruched up on either side of the shoulder. Several times we can tell by the fabric that the sleeves are part of her petticoat, and never do we ever see a hint of another set of sleeves beneath that, which, if the sleeves were puffed like the shift, they would definitely sit lower than the ruching. I've only found one moment where we see a petticoat in its entirety, and it is during this interview. So my theory is that if she was wearing a shift throughout the movie, and I can't be certain that she was, because there is never any trace of it, but if she was, it was definitely sleeveless. And her petticoats all had sleeves pretty much exactly like that pink petticoat. The point of putting sleeves on a shift is to protect the outer layers from sweat, but with modern washing methods, the film set might not have been super worried about that. The only other real historical inaccuracy people have pointed out about the movie is there's sometimes hesitancy to break up the time of day by sleeve length and chemisette use. I disagree with the chemisette argument. I think that the movie actually rolled unusually hard into chemisettes. The sleeve length critique is possibly valid. Emma almost always wears short sleeve dresses, and she doesn't always properly cover up when she goes outdoors. You could mark this down to her character and station, but I think the answer is more obvious and simple. Aesthetics. The movie had to find a balance between history and beauty that could be appreciated by a wider audience, not just the historical fashion nuts. And this goes for some of the other choices made as well. Many of her pieces strike me as historical, but just a fraction off. Many garments were simplified, streamlined. They didn't roll heavily into the fluffy, lace and bows, ultra-feminine opulence of the era, which is an understandable choice. We have our own cultural norms and stereotypes, and can a modern audience really be expected to take Emma seriously if she's dressed like an overgrown child in a nightdress? Maybe they should, but it's the choice the filmmakers went with. Okay, now that we've discussed the history behind Emma's silhouette and layers, let's talk about her wardrobe as a whole. Often when I see movies, I'm less interested in any one specific outfit and more weirdly fascinated with how all of the moving parts of a wardrobe function together. And versatility is a trait that the Regency era excels at, and what won my love for the era. I used to hate Regency. It used to be my least favorite period, like I said, because I thought that the women all looked like little girls in nightgowns. My opinion didn't change until I began to understand the absolutely breathtaking versatility of Regency style. Every piece of a Regency woman's wardrobe was designed for maximum versatility, adaptability, and economy. The Regency staple item is a white dress. The color of the dress can be altered at whim through layering. Sleeves can be lengthened or shortened through a few simple whip stitches. It can be a simple daily wear dress. The addition of a bodice can transform it into an evening gown. What is the point of a jacket with short sleeves? Versatility. What is the point of all of the scarves, hats, chemisettes, spencers, and pelisses? It is all about versatility. The Regency era is also fun because of the ways it will surprise you. Women's clothing prior to the Regency had been fairly consistent for a very long time, and the fashion revolution gave women a blank slate to experiment with, making up their own pieces and drawing inspiration from a variety of sources to adorn their simple white bases. At the time of the Regency, fabric was still prohibitively expensive. The very fine cotton, then preferred over linen or wool, had to be imported. But with the Regency method of layering, one white cotton dress could be easily restyled for any occasion. A new bodice could be made from barely a scrap of silk, and then you have a whole new look and color scheme. Spencers required more for the sleeves, but they still used very little fabric in comparison to earlier 18th century jackets. Pelisses required the most fabric, but even a lower income woman only needed one for warmth, and that one pelisse could be styled differently with chemisette collars, hats, and shawls. Simple straw hats could be retrimmed. The sliding buckles can be interchanged. Even Regency parures show the wonderful sense of economy they had. If you're going to invest in jewelry, why not buy a matching set? So that whether your outfit requires a necklace, earrings, brooch, tiara, or anything else, you can always be sure your jewels will coordinate. The small layers of a Regency ensemble show us an incredibly economical way to diversify a wardrobe. I love the concept of a capsule wardrobe, and the most effective wardrobe is the one that uses the smallest number of pieces and the greatest variety of ways. Emma is the perfect case study of Regency versatility, and the costumers did a fantastic job. In the movie, we can track the progression of a wealthy Regency woman's wardrobe through the course of one full year. Never does she wear an identical outfit twice. But how well did the costumers represent this wardrobe? Let us do a full inventory. Throughout the year, Emma wears 6 day dresses and 6 fancy dresses. She has a summer evening dress and a winter evening dress, and 2 ball gowns. She also has 2 special occasion dresses, her Christmas dress, which I speculate is an heirloom, and her wedding dress. That is a surprisingly reasonable balance. As far as I can tell, Emma has 6 petticoats. She has 2 white petticoats, 3 colored petticoats, and 1 satin petticoat for her ball gowns. She has 10 different chemisettes, which maybe could have been scaled down a little bit. But considering how small they are and how relatively inexpensive they would have been to collect, it is reasonable. Emma wears 6 different bodices, through which she can add warmth or dress up a basic gown. She has 9 different jackets. 3 are lightweight spencers, 5 are pelisses in differing levels of warmth, and she has 1 cloak. Considering that for a woman of Emma's class, a jacket was pretty much a prerequisite to even leave the house, this seems appropriate. Shoes were harder to track, but from what I could spot, Emma has 6 pairs of daily wear boots, of which she strongly favors the yellow and secondly favors the black. She has basic tan flats for most evening occasions, plus a pair of flats to match each ball gown. And she has a pair of pattens to protect her nicer shoes from the mud. Emma liberally combines an assortment of jewelry, sometimes practically, sometimes purely for effect. She has at least 16 pairs of earrings, 9 necklaces, 5 brooches, 4 hair sticks, 3 tiaras, 2 gold headbands, 2 sets of matching bracelets, 1 gold bangle, her 2 rings, and the various buckles and slides she uses to close her jackets. While this is a lot, and she does have an obvious weakness for small dangle earrings, you do have to remember that a woman like Emma probably hasn't purchased much jewelry for herself. Rather, she would have inherited a collection from her mother and other previous matrons of the family. She uses 9 different shawls and scarves, though usually for effect rather than warmth. Emma carries 6 different reticules, most of which are crochet. 6 does seem to be the number the costumers kept going with. And she wears 8 different pairs of gloves. 2 are tall leather gloves primarily used for evening events, 2 are short leather gloves for day wear. And because gloves were a requirement regardless of season or weather, she also has 2 short lace pairs for summer and 2 tall lace pairs. She carries a few other accessories, 2 fur muffs, a fan, a small parasol, a lace handkerchief, and then there are the hats. Emma has 14, most of which are only worn once. The hats are the one area where I felt like the quantity versus versatility factor was way off. I would have loved to see the same hat being used multiple times in different ways, especially if it had been the same base hat with different trimmings. Overall, I feel like Emma's wardrobe painted a remarkably realistic picture of what a real woman's wardrobe might have looked like. It even fits into the 80-20 principle, with about 20% of her clothing getting 80% of the screen time, and the rest of it only appearing once or twice. Her clothes follow a distinct personal style, and she has a clear preference for crossed front bodices and ruched sleeves. She has a proclivity for earrings, but she has a favorite necklace, chain, bangle, and rings that she wears regularly. She has very few staple items and a large number of small accessories that can be combined almost infinitely. At first I was annoyed that most of her reticules are crochet, and in reality, the movie probably hired a crocheter, kind of like how Game of Thrones had Michelle Carragher as the embroiderer. So if you have a crocheter on staff, why not just make them all crochet? But historically, there was great variety in reticules. Some were crochet, some netted, some embroidered, some were painted or beaded. They came in all shapes and sizes, and most women made their own reticules, as little showpieces of their handiwork. I was disappointed that the costumers had not used more variety in Emma's reticules, but then I realized that this is actually perfectly in character with Emma's tendency to think a little bit more highly of her skills than they actually merit, whether that be artistic, musical, or social. Maybe she can't embroider or bead. Maybe all she learned how to do is crochet. I don't know, but it makes me laugh. So what can we as a modern audience learn from Regency fashion and Emma's wardrobe in particular? I'm primarily talking to the history bounders right now, and anyone else thinking critically about their own wardrobe, but you know, whatever. Personally, I think the biggest lesson would be the advantage of consistency. How much more effective your sewing can be if you have the self-discipline to streamline your designs. Extrapolating new patterns from ones you've already perfected, narrowing down your color scheme to one that is purposefully interchangeable, and then the big one for me, picking one silhouette that is comfortable and works well for my body type, and then sticking to it. All of these things I really suck at. I would much rather jump around at whatever is currently piquing my interest. But the negative aspect of that is that I see massive waste of my own energy with minimal results. I think I'm at the point in my sewing journey where streamlining my mindset is the push I need to get to that next level. If I were to invest my time into building a solid collection of basic pieces, from there I could add to it and increase versatility. So what do you think? Where are you in your sewing journey? Maybe you are just starting, maybe you're just starting to think about starting. Maybe you're way ahead of me, or maybe you're on a completely different track altogether. Either way, I would enjoy hearing about it. Please don't take me too seriously. I'm literally just an uneducated internet tramp fumbling through history alongside you. But I hope that through this video you have learned a few things about Regency fashion and acquired a new appreciation for it, whether you like the era or not, and that you've gained some insight into the costumes of Emma. If you want to do more research of your own, I will include links to the articles I read, as well as a Pinterest board where I uploaded all of those screenshots I took of the movie. If you would like to see a deeper analysis of the construction and historical inspiration behind Emma's pieces, I will add a link to the breakdown video.